My name is Matt Carter, and I'm an associate professor of biology at Williams College, where I teach in the biology department and also part of the neuroscience program. And here at Williams, I teach classes in neuroscience, especially systems neuroscience and how the brain is wired up, and also courses in physiology. And my lab studies the neural basis of homeostasis using mice as a model organism.
What advice would you give to your undergraduate self?
I wish that I had more of an appreciation for what I was learning. I definitely did, but I always interpreted it in terms of exams and quizzes and lab reports and assignments and how I was going to do. And I wish that I had just focused more on loving the content and going after classes and assignments and opportunities that we're enjoying just for the sake of it, and not thinking so much about the academic process that surrounds it. Because while it's important to think about it and do it well, I think that sometimes it's easy to let yourself focus on it entirely. And I think that if you really just enjoy it for its own sake, that it just makes the experience of being in a class a lot better.
What does your research focus on?
Obviously, the body needs a certain amount of calories each day. It needs a certain amount of water. It needs a certain amount of sleep. And what I'm interested in is where in the brain is that regulated? How do the neurons measure how many calories you need, or how much water you need, or how much sleep you need? And once it measures these factors and it determines that you might need more of them, how does it then change your motivational drive in order to seek those factors? And so we call these motivations hunger or thirst or fatigue, but they happen so naturally that we have the sense that they just happen. You feel hungry, you feel tired, you feel thirsty. It just seems so obvious that these things just happen, but really the brain is going through a very complicated set of measurements to determine exactly how much of these factors you need, and then motivate you to get just enough of them but not too much, and so you don't eat too much, or you don't drink too much, and you don't sleep too much. So in my lab, we look at the specific neurons involved with those behaviors, and we use mice, and we do experiments where we try to figure out which parts of the brain are regulating those behaviors, and how do they talk to other parts of the brain, and how is this all regulated at the level of the nervous system.
When did you know that you loved neuroscience?
I realized I liked neuroscience when I took a psychology course in college, and I realized that my favorite parts of the psychology course were the biology aspects of it. I realized that I really liked thinking about the mind and the brain, but I especially loved learning how it worked. And I think that the big question for me that really sparked my interest in neuroscience was the question of how. A lot of times people can focus on the what, in terms of like the anatomy of it all. Or sometimes people ask questions like why did the brain evolve this way? But the how for me was really interesting. How does the brain accomplish all of the things that it does? And I think in terms of neuroscience, that's answered by biology. So ultimately, at the end of the day, all of the psychology of the mind is regulated by the cells of the brain, and how the cells work, and the genes and the proteins that are involved, and then the neurobiology of how the neurons are wired together. And so I thought it was just really fascinating that at the end of the day, all of these things that our brain does is essentially biology, and there's a mechanism to how it all works. And I think that neuroscience is fascinating, that it tries to determine the mechanisms of these really complicated things like emotions and motivations and memory, but it ultimately can be explained by biology. And I remember that when I first realized that, I just thought that was really cool, and I wanted to learn more.
What do you like most about teaching neuroscience?
I love teaching neuroscience because, at least with the classes that I teach, um, students enter having a vague notion of what the brain is and how it works. I think a lot of times people learn about neurons and we start to learn about how neurons function, but I love it when people start to make realizations about how it all works at a global level. And when you can start to make connections about not just about cells themselves, but about how the cells might be wired so that if something touches your finger, we can explore, well, where is the neuron that is in the finger that allows the sense of touch to be transduced, and how is that ultimately connecting through a series of neuronal synaptic connections up to the brain. And once I see students making those connections and then learning about system after system, so not just touch, but hearing or other sensory systems or motor systems or cognitive systems like memory and more emotional systems, I love it, not only when people make connection after connection and they just discover how cool it is that they're learning how they work as a animal themselves, but then I love it when people look at new situations and they realize that there must be a neural system that regulates that system.